Welcome to the Inspiration North podcast, inspiring stories from inspirational people and how they found their passion, their true north. I'm James Eves.
And I'm Michelle Minikin, and this is the Inspiration North podcast.
Today's episode, sometimes it takes to getting to where you want to be to realise it's not where you're meant to be, with Alex Galviz. We talk about the impact of working in an industry not aligned with her values, taking the opportunities that scared her the most, and growing a global movement and community with no money.
By day, Alex coaches C-suite, consultants and entrepreneurs on how to get noticed on LinkedIn, grow their personal brand and leverage the platform to achieve their goals. By night, she turns into a superhero LinkedIn blogger under the hashtag AuthenticAlex. Every single thing that people would be scared of sharing publicly, she has either written, videoed or spoken about. The reason she has chose to share and discuss her difficulties is because in doing so, we can disarm some of the social conventions that keep these topics taboo. Alex also trains apprentices and graduates in corporates, creates digital content on employability skills, and delivers keynotes at universities, career fairs and social mobility events. She's also a co-creator of a little side project called LinkedIn Local that has turned into the biggest hashtag campaign on LinkedIn, creating communities in 90 countries and 1,000 cities in under 2 years before handing over the reins to LinkedIn. With a knack for community building, she helped form Local X with the other founders of LinkedIn Local, a community consulting startup helping businesses and organisations create, nurture and scale their own communities.
Well, thank you for joining us, Alex. So, what was your childhood like? Let's start there.
Okay, so I grew up, so I was born in London, immigrant parents, so my mum's Colombian and my dad's Moroccan.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was about 12 months old, my dad walked out on us, so I ended up in a single parent household and grew up sort of low income household, lived in a council flat. So it was not the easiest of upbringings, and there were many nights of rice and eggs as a staple dinner. And my mum worked about 2 to 3 jobs on a regular basis, sort of trying to feed us and keep us clothed. And in summer, she'd sort of send us off to Colombia with her family for her to be able to sort of work full time, and then for us to sort of have that kind of cultural immersion from a young age. So that was sort of my initial upbringing. I then had a bit of a tricky period in education where when you go to primary school, you basically, or when you're moving from primary school to secondary school, you've got to change schools most of the time. And I applied to go to various secondary schools, and in that interim, my mum had sent me to stay in France for the summer in sort of like a sports camp thing, with some family, friends. And so I did that for about 2 to 3 months. And when she came to pick me up, she was like, "Alex, I don't really have good news." And I said, "Well, you know, what's happened?" And she said, "Oh, you didn't get into any secondary school." So every year in the UK, there is a massive number of students that fall through the net that don't get into secondary schools, which is quite an unknown thing until that period of time comes in the year. It gets talked about once in the news and then it sort of disappears, and no one knows about these groups of kids that kind of are just sort of left there. And so there was only kind of one option, which was, stay in France. Which was sort of suggested by the family I was staying with. And it was the best of kind of not great options or no options. And I was, at that time I was 10, 11. And I was like, well, what does that mean? And that meant that I had to sort of stay with this family because it would be complicated for my mum to move over and whatnot. And I ended up staying in France for a full year. I kind of flitted between a few host families. I was incredibly homesick. I didn't speak a word of French. So I went to like the equivalent of year 7, where I was studying like the start of grammar and literature and history and art, all in a language that was completely foreign to me. And to me, I describe that period of my life as being one of the best and worst experiences. And kind of what I think for me, I call was a massive growth spurt in terms of like maturity. So, and something that I think I've just never kind of re-leveled with people my age since, is that I had to become more mature than my age at that point, because I was in a country that wasn't mine. I spoke a language that I didn't even speak when I started living there. And you know, in a situation that I kind of had to manage my life in a way at quite a young age. So that was quite a tricky period. I then came back from France and from having that experience. It was great because I spoke fluent French by the time I actually left. I was a lot more sort of culturally aware of things that I hadn't been previously from having that experience. A lot of emotional intelligence, again, from like, if you don't speak the language, you're kind of queuing into people's emotions and way of being and whatnot. And when I got back, my mum had found me a school in quite a rough neighborhood in London, but it was the only option. But the school was amazing, and I went there, and the thing was, the discipline in the French education system is so like, you know, regimented. It's like you go over and beyond when you hand in homework. You like really dedicate yourself to your studies. So I kind of came with this ethos and went into this school that just didn't have students that thought that way or work that way. And so I really stood out very quickly for the wrong reasons, which caused me a lot of situations, bad situations. So I was bullied as a kid quite severely for about 2 years in total, until, you know, the school found out, my mum found out, and for my own safety, I was pulled out of the school. So I was back to being homeschooled again.
Oh, wow.
So to say my childhood has been a bit of a roller coaster is probably an understatement. I then basically got homeschooled for about 6 to 9 months, pretty much missed a year of proper schooling, went to, got placed in a new school again, and at this point I'm doing my GCSEs, and I've missed a year of them. So I'm having to catch up in terms of 2 years worth of GCSEs in 1 year. So I was studying in the day, and then the teachers were tutoring me in the evening for the year before I'd missed, and they'd sort of said to my mum, you know, the likelihood of her passing is quite low because you're asking her to do 2 sets of years of work in one. And that may mean that she can't get into college, which may mean she won't be able to get into uni. So the odds were again very stacked against me, and I just sort of worked, put my head down. I didn't really socialize much in school because I just wanted to avoid any form of confrontation or anything. And then ended up passing with A stars and A's and whatnot, to the surprise of a lot of people, obviously, that didn't think that might be possible. And then I went sort of to college, went from an all-girls school to an all-boys college.
Brilliant.
Or all-boys school that had a mixed college, but there was maybe sort of 8 girls. Did a mixture of sort of, this is where things started to be like, okay, what do I want to do later? So I was sort of flitting between being smart about my choices and flitting between what I actually really enjoyed. So I did a lot of languages. So I grew up speaking obviously French, Spanish is my mother tongue, learnt English at school, and had spent quite a lot of time in Italy in summers there. So there's like a recurring theme of my mum sending me off to foreign countries, which has been heavily beneficial in terms of perfecting languages, which had, as an adult, has then opened a lot of doors. But then, so I finished college, did a lot of languages, did some art, literature, and then decided that at university I'd go and study French because it had become a massive part of my life, and I just loved everything about the culture and the language. And I thought, if I'm going to study something for 4 years, it better be something I enjoy. But even when I applied, I just knew that I never wanted to be a translator, an interpreter, or a teacher. And people were like, well, why are you doing this degree? And I'm like, well, I want to do what I'm passionate about at university. But I was also very conscious that that wasn't the career path that I wanted. So I was pretty smart in terms of, right, if this isn't what I'm going to do, I'm going to need to have some form of backup plan or like something in place to help me get to where I want to go to. And that was sort of working in the financial services, because I'd had a taste of working in the city through a internship program that was run by a social mobility charity called the Brokerage City Link, and they connect students that come from ethnic minorities, low-income families, council flat upbringings, and connect them to opportunities in the city, because very rarely, unless you have someone in your family that's connected to that, it's very hard for that kind of demographic to get into those networks and opportunities in city. So through them, I got an opportunity to work for an insurance company called Mapfree, and it was just, I think that was the first point that I look back on and think, this is really where I started to realise how capable I was as a young person. And it was because I got very lucky with where I was doing my internship, in that they'd never had an intern. So my assumption was like, oh, I'm going to do the teas and the coffees and the photocopying. And then actually what ended up happening was that we kind of built the role together. And I ended up sort of going from like data entry when I started all the way through to, by the end of my internship, project planning £1 million deal with Royal Caribbean.
Wow.
At 18. And that was just like a mind-blowing experience, because it was like, wow, actually I'm capable of doing a lot more than I gave myself credit for, and I'm probably not the most normal 18-year-old. And that was kind of the thing that lit this fire in my belly to like be like, okay, right, I really want to go into insurance or business and build my career there, basically. Long-winded version of my childhood, but a lot happened in a short amount of time.
That's great. So what did you, just a reflection, I think you probably ruined that company for interns going forward.
Oh, probably.
So what came next? So you're at university studying French, then what did you do?
So after I did that first sort of internship, I thought, I've gained so much knowledge, I've built a network, I've got all this experience from it, I just need to do it again. So I basically dedicated myself to spending every summer throughout my 4-year course interning in different places. And you know, I got lucky that there was an organisation that helped me find that in the first instance, but then it was sort of up to me, and no one was telling me go and do that, but I just felt like it was something that I needed to do. If I wasn't going to do a business or finance degree, I was at least going to get the experience in those sectors. And so I found an internship. Every time in my mind I was like, oh, let me set the bar higher. So I was like, oh, I wonder if I can get an internship in Paris. And so I found myself an internship in Paris doing web marketing and SEO for a price comparison website, and spent the summer there, which was probably one of the best summers of my entire life, because it was pretty much cool city, just the summer, miserable pay, hate the job, but actually I loved the team that I was working with, and just that experience was just magical. I then next summer applied for a job at the London Chamber of Commerce, so I was advising businesses on how to set up their businesses or partnerships with UK entities, like on tax legislation, all that sort of stuff. And again, that was an incredible experience to be the kind of front end person of those initial queries. And then the following summer I decided to work for a recruitment company that were hiring candidates, multilingual candidates, so I could get on the phone and test their language skills, because I spoke all these languages. And that's kind of one where I sort of started thinking, actually this language thing is really a thing like for businesses, because they're not, you know, they don't have to have a recruiter for each language, they just had to have me, and I could do like 3 languages. And then I was working specifically in the banking and finance sector of that recruitment company, so I was looking at what companies wanted of candidates and what candidates were putting forward. So there was a strategic reasoning behind working for that as a last experience. I knew I definitely did not want to go into recruitment, but it gave me a lot of insight that I wouldn't have been able to get otherwise. And so by the time I left, I started thinking, okay, well, what is it that I want to do? That those internships allowed me to see what I liked, but more importantly, what I actually didn't want to do, or the things that I didn't like doing. And I actually ended up getting headhunted straight out of uni by a American foreign exchange company. So in the end, I didn't really have to do anything.
Brilliant. You laid the groundwork.
Yes, exactly. And they'd found me, not surprisingly, on LinkedIn.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
Yes. And so I got headhunted by them to kind of do like a graduate entry job. And that was very much, could you be the person that's the point of contact between our sales teams, our IT teams, and our clients for an online trading platform for foreign exchange? So kind of like internet banking, but for foreign exchange in big companies. And if something went wrong, then it was up to me to figure out with the back end team what was going on. So it was an interesting first job, let's just say.
It's like, I don't know what's going on here.
Yeah. And salespeople are interesting people when under our technology or product's not working. And that, money's reliant on that and whatnot. So that was really interesting because I came in and the person that had done that role before had a horrible relationship with the sales guys. So I kind of inherited all of that. And, the culture in the company in the first place was terrible. But there was a lot of kind of swearing. There was a lot of animosity and anger. And I was just like, I can't do this job. I cannot work here if this is how we interact when this team that's been set up is only there to help you and enable your job. If you're being like that with me, I can't help you. And so that's kind of the first time that I kind of thought, okay, now I know that was literally like a mini project of mine on culture change. Because I had to basically wipe the slate clean and go, I'm new, please, whatever happened, that is not anything to do with me. Let's try and make this partnership work rather than, kind of clash every time there's a situation. So that was the first time that I was like, okay, this needs to happen. And then after a year of being there, I had a great relationship with my boss and my team. The girl that used to do the role in the EU moved to London for a different role, and that role opened up, and I said, well, can I just do both? And can you double my salary? And they were like, sure.
Wow.
And all of a sudden, it happened, and I got promoted, and that was an opportunity. I started realizing that I did this in the internship in Paris as well, that if I didn't like something, I'm quite vocal, and in a good way, I'd just be like, this isn't working out for me. This is an alternative solution. Can we discuss how this could be done? And more often than not, people say yes, but I think and that's why I have a massive problem with this whole women in glass ceiling thing, because I think a lot of it stems from not actually asking. And for me, I've never actually had any situations like that because I've never not asked for what I want. And most times I've gotten what I want. So that was again me creating an opportunity that didn't exist. I did that for another year, and then started realizing that actually one of the biggest things that was sort of causing issues within that role and situation was that the sales guys were selling a product they had no idea how to use. So how were they to sell it to clients if they couldn't explain it or don't use it? So I started building in a training program to take people through on a quarterly basis, and anyone that was inducted started going through this training program on this product, and any new features, it was communicated. So that was something nothing was happening before that. And again, that was sort of when I started to dip my toe into training and development, which was by no background in. It was very much out of initiative and trying to find a solution to this problem, and kind of making myself redundant in a way, because there was starting to be sort of this self-running system around it. And after spending 2 years in that company, I was like, okay, well, my job's sort of done here, and I don't see myself going anywhere else in the company, like in terms of my team. And I sort of was very open with my boss and said, look, we have a great relationship, but I just don't feel like there's anywhere else for me to go. And I was starting to get bored in the role that I was in, because there wasn't, I'd done everything that could be done. And they said, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I could try my hand at sales. And so they set up this relationship manager role with a portfolio like ready to go. But what they didn't know was that I was also being approached by 2 companies at the same time. So I was kind of just seeing what option there was internally. I was approached by a pharmaceutical company that was setting up in the UK, and they were US based. And they were like literally trying to like get me to come so many times, because I spoke like 3 languages, and for them they wanted a sales rep or business developer that spoke all these languages, because they had sort of international markets. And then I got approached by a competitor of the company I was working in, and they'd obviously heard what I'd done with this company in terms of the training and development. And initially I found out about them through a recruitment company, and I went to an interview, and it was for a sales role in the south of France. And I did the interview and talked about this sort of training stuff that I did and whatnot. And it got to sort of the second round, and I just decided that it wasn't the role for me, because the south of France, even though I love France, is kind of where you go and wind down your career rather than accelerate it. And I thought, it's great from like September to June to September, but September to June it's miserable. And I thought, it's not quite the place for me right now. Maybe in a later stage in my life it could have been an option. And so I just declined continuing the process, but then messaged the person who interviewed me, who was the global head of sales, and said, really, really love the company. And would love to find out if there's anything else more suitable, later down the line. And then 6 weeks later, I get a message saying, actually, we've just created this new role, and it's the head of training and development. Would you be up for doing it? And I was like, did you send me the right job description? I'm 24, and like my experience in training and development is a fraction of what you'd probably hire someone in that kind of management position, with a good amount of experience. And they took me to a very swanky restaurant with a rooftop, which was a very weird feeling, and had lunch with him and the head of dealing for the company. And I was being interviewed, and I thought, this is really at the end of the interview they said, do you have any questions? And I said, yeah, I've got 2. One is that I've heard through the grapevine you're selling the company, and you don't need to confirm whether that's true or not, because I'm sure you probably can't say that right now. But I don't want to I don't want to jump ship to then end up being let go pretty instantly because a bigger fish has bought you. And I could just see he was going to be my manager, his face just dropped, because it just wasn't common knowledge. And he didn't obviously expect the question, and he's a terrible liar. And so I was like, okay, well, that's confirmed what I thought. And he was like, well, if that happens, then, I can assure you that it's not a bigger fish that's, that would buy us. And I was like, okay, that's fine, I'm assured. And then the second question was, why are you courting me? Like, why are you taking me to a swanky restaurant when I'm 24? And, you do this sort of thing when you're like trying to headhunt a very senior person. And he just said, we like the ambition that you have, what you've done in the company, and all these things. And I still found it strange, but that was their way of trying to get me to move over. And I eventually took that job. And most of the time when I'm asked, you had 3 opportunities, why that one? And I said, because it's the one that scared me the most. Because it was like, how on earth am I going to be able to do this? And for the first 3 months of that role, it was very much like, what have I gotten myself into? Have I bitten more than I can chew? And it was, it was an experience.
That's amazing.
So I can shall I continue?
Yeah, go on. I'm loving this story. It's brilliant.
So I feel like I'm reading a storybook.
No, I know. So James and I are just going to fall asleep.
That's like your. I always throw in. I'm like the font of all these useless quotes and knowledge, but it reminds me of what Richard Branson says, isn't it? Someone offers you an opportunity that you're not quite sure you can do it. Say yes, and then figure it out later.
Yeah,
as you go along.
pretty much.
I've got one as well. The Brené Brown. It's at the cave. The cave you fear to enter is the one you should go into. Something along those lines.
Yeah, she's my absolute idol.
Yeah, we love her. He's very excited about the Netflix thing.
Netflix documentary.
Which has probably gone out by the time we put up this. So.
I know, I turned around to my partner and I was like, on that day, you are not doing anything. We are both sitting down to watch this.
So, James doesn't know that, but
it's probably in my diary.
Yeah. I don't tell him. I just tell him day by day, keep him in suspense. Cool. So, 3 months in.
3 months in. Well, actually, let me go back to actually starting that job.
Okay.
So when I did my internship in the city, I kind of set myself 2 goals. The first one was when I am in a position of power, you could say, and I have the opportunity to hire, I will hire interns from the same program that I was on, because that was important to me. I knew that opened the door to literally my entire career. And the second one was that by the time I'm 30, I want to be in management, earn a lot of money, travel internationally with work, and be able to afford nice designer clothes. When I got that at 24, I literally was like, the rug was pulled underneath me. It was just like, this is not how I thought it would feel. And something felt really off, like from the get-go. And I thought, I'm not gonna try and figure this out, because I don't think it's something that I can instantly find an answer for. I'm someone that just has to find answers. Like, if I'm not feeling okay, I need to figure out why and how to fix it. And so I thought, okay, let's just kind of crack on and see what happens. And so that, that really shook me, because I was like, well, I've worked for, from the moment I was 18 to 24, I've literally invested 6 years of my life, like, non-stop working to get to this goal. And it really sort of shook me. So I started doing this job, and the first year was bliss, because, there was a lot of money around for me to go on training and development, and my boss was very much encouraging me, because what he realized very quickly was that I had a fear of public speaking. And where your role is primarily to train people and speak in front of people, that's going to be an issue. And so he sent me off on he just said, find some courses, practice in a safe space, and then come back and start, doing this. So I went off on this speaking workshop called the Speaking Adventure, and it was literally like coming out another person. It was a 2-day workshop on speaking with confidence and from an authentic place. And I didn't realize that then this was probably going to be one of the main sort of key points of my story that would then go on later. So I continued doing all of these sort of training and development things, and then it started for work initially, and then it started becoming a bit of an obsession, because I was like, wow, I'm uncovering all these things about myself, like, what else don't I know? And so I started delving into coaching and sales stuff and whatnot, and very quickly started realizing, actually, I am so in the wrong place. My values do not align whatsoever with the industry I've picked. I couldn't really care less about money. And yet my entire foundation was based on having money. And I realized very quickly that came from my upbringing. When you don't have any money, you want money. When you don't have status, you want power. All these things are very sort of stemmed from my upbringing, and from a family that was very kind of, you're going into finance because that's where you make money. And I that's a massive reason, and I'll talk about it later, why I work a lot with young people that come from that same demographic, because there's a huge amount of pressure put on you to go into those sorts of industries that kind of guarantee wealth, sort of thing. So I continued doing this role, and kind of got to a point where I started burning out, because the role was getting bigger. in terms of, there was no one in my team, and yet I designed, delivered, implemented anything from there was nothing before. So it was setting up an induction process globally. So it was a global company with more than 20 offices. It was running the inductions physically, actually, in the UK. It was sales training, product training, process training, like everything. Training and development fell under me. And because there was no internal HR, anyone that had an HR thing would kind of come to me and ask me anyway. So I ended up basically like crashing and burning on numerous occasions, and then having this kind of this unsettling feeling of like something's not okay fundamentally in me, and all of this kind of just made me crash and burn, and I just literally went into like the depths of depression. And spent a good 6 months in, not being able to get out of bed, and on the weekends. So it was a situation of like, my mind was saying, Alex, all you have to do is just lift the covers and get out of bed, and my body just physically would not connect with what my mind was telling me to do. And pretty much spent 6 months in bed every single weekend. And so you'd go back to work and it was like, oh, how was your weekend? Yeah, it was great. I had so much fun, like hang out with friends, or like, tried to just, that small talk that you have by the kitchen while you're making a cup of tea sort of thing. Kind of trying to mask what was going on as well at work. From Monday to Friday, I kind of looked like I had my shit together, but really I didn't. And if anything, it kind of in a way provided me structure in terms of getting me out the house. Like, there was a reason to get out of bed Monday to Friday. There was no reason Saturday and Sunday. And yeah, there was just a lot of sort of stress, a lot of anxiety, can I actually do this anymore? How have I ended up here? I think, there was a difficulty in unraveling a lot about myself that really made me think, shit, like how did I get here? Like, and how is this just kind of all coming crashing down and burning? And then I had this colleague that, very kind of openly talked about going to therapy. And he turned around to me because my boss had said that whilst I showed people that I was very confident, I was incredibly not confident, and that he noticed that. And if I was ever going to progress in my career, I needed to learn how to be more confident. And so I told this to my colleague, and I said, my boss has just said this. And he was like, do you think that maybe it's worth going to therapy given like what's happened to you in your past? Because we were quite close, and I told him what had happened at school, and that stemmed from a lot of, my lack of confidence. And I was like, oh, no way. I was like, at school, I got sent to see the counsellor, forced to go, horrible experience, had to sit in a room with the girls that used to bully me. So like, for me, therapy is just the adult version of that. And there's no way in hell I'm doing that again. And also, I came from a culture that depression is not in their vocabulary, and you just kind of sweep problems under the rug. And you get on with life. And like, my family has a motto that says, be strong like the Galviz, like, that I absolutely now hate. Because it's like, be strong whatever happens, and I just don't agree with that. And so for me, it was so hard initially, because it was like, it's just not in my thinking or my way of doing things. And every single week he'd like poke me and be like, have you at least checked the website? Or, again, the following week, have you actually rang anyone? Or like, just take one call or go to one meeting. And it was just so relentless. And someone described it recently as relentlessly caring. And in a way it was. And I went. It took me 3 months to put my foot into a therapy room and see a therapist. And it was literally, that was the beginning of the end. It was, for me, I describe therapy as like going into a room and like being able to talk, because I'm an introvert naturally. So if there's a room full of loud people, I'll just go quiet and I'll just listen most of the time. So this was the opportunity to all of a sudden have it the other way around and be able to actually speak and be heard. And there's obviously lots of different types of therapies and whatnot, but this wasn't really someone giving me the answers, or this wasn't someone kind of coaching me, even though the poor woman spoke a lot about work to her. So I think she felt like half career coach, half therapist. But it was more about just having somewhere to just let it all out and just cry and cry and cry nonstop. And it unraveled a lot of things about my childhood, which I sort of knew, but interestingly, it kind of tied into a lot with my my relationship with my family and my relationship with my boss, which kind of were very similar in a negative way. And realize that, okay, actually there's two things. One, I need to leave my job, and one, I need to leave my home. And I was trying to figure out which one was more of a priority. And at the time I thought that my house was more of a priority, and in the end it ended up being my job. And I ended up quitting on a very knee-jerk reaction because I was getting promoted in January 2017, and they said, we want you to do the rest of the training for the company. Would you do it? And I said, well, I need someone to help me. I don't really care if you don't increase my salary, even though that would be nice, but I just need someone because I can't physically do this anymore on my own. I'd burnt out twice quite severely, and they were conscious of that. And they were like, yeah, sure, no problem, we'll do that. And then when it actually came to it, at the last minute, the kind of budget was pulled from it. And I was like, yeah, no, I'm good. But then I saw them spending money in like really stupid ways. And I was just like, when I found out, I was like, yep, I'm done. Like, there was no plan. Like, I had no idea what I was doing. There was no money in the bank because I hadn't saved. And it was just like I just physically can't. And I think one of the things that really kind of opened my eyes as to like this situation is as bad as it can get was I was going on to work one morning, and I mentioned that the structure of a Monday to Friday was quite good because it was like, cool, I can I have somewhere to go. But it got to a point where I was getting on the tube or about to get on the tube and like teetering on the platform going like, I don't really want to go to work, and feeling like just sort of swaying back and forth on the edge of the platform and going like, this is not okay, like there is something fundamentally wrong if I am doing this. And then the train approached, and I got on the train, and just as the train doors were closing, I hopped off again, and I was like, no way, I just can't, I physically can't get into work. And I left, and I think that was sort of, that happened very close to me actually giving my handing in my resignation letter, and I was just like, I can't do this. And my boss was very shocked and tried to convince me to stay. But he had also been going through his own stuff, and our relationship had very drastically turned sour because he was going through his own issues personally, and being the closest person to him at work, I was the one that was getting most of the brunt. And obviously that sort of impacted a lot of the reasoning of why I was leaving as well, because I'd gone to do that job primarily to work and be managed by him. So when that wasn't really happening anymore, I was like, yeah, there is no reason for me to be here anymore. And then I left. Yeah.
When you made that decision, did you get feedback from your family, friends, close circle? That we've often met guests where when you make that sort of decision of you're leaving what appears to be a great career, you're successful, Alex, you're mad. Why would you do that?
Yeah. My mum found it really hard. Because it was all she'd ever dreamed of. I've got an older brother that works in a hedge fund. So, she had the two picture perfect kids that had come, had grown from nothing to be incredibly successful in the financial sector. And one of them was turning into a black sheep. So that was very hard for her. I think it got harder as she knew that I wasn't planning to go back. Because initially it was just like, I'm quitting, and then I'll decide what I'm going to do next. So it was a bit sort of in limbo, but the the process of then going, actually, I'm going to do my own thing, initially was exciting. And then the realities of that process was not as exciting as it sounded initially. I think a lot of people think that running your own business is all fun and games, and it's not always like that behind closed doors or behind LinkedIn profiles. And so that was hard. I think my friends, I actually ended up losing a huge amount of friends.
Wow.
Because I describe it as shaking the foundations of other people when you do that. Because they start to think, actually, am I happy in my job? Do I know who I am? And that's questions that a lot of people are scared to answer. And a lot of people are scared to do the work that involves in asking those questions. And I realized a lot that, working in the city, like everyone's pretty much miserable most of the time.
We saw them. They were running around the South Bank on Wednesday. It was like, crikey.
And you kind of go Monday to Friday, hate my job. And then you get to Friday evening and you're like, yeah, let's all get pissed and hammered. And then like you wake up on Saturday completely hungover. Gonna watch Netflix, gonna eat crap food, maybe head to the gym on Sunday, and then you go to Monday and you do it all over again.
Bonkers.
And that's the life that people lead. And I'm not criticizing, but what I realize is that I do not want to surround myself with that kind of person anymore. And so I made a decision to kind of distance myself from most of those people, because what I realize is that actually they're really superficial friendships. And I wasn't interested in anything superficial anymore. I wanted real, I wanted authentic, I wanted to talk about things that were important. The other thing was that the day I decided to leave my job, I wrote a post on LinkedIn that kind of uncovered everything, and if anything was the clearest example of everything that had gone on. And what had happened was that I shared the story of, when I was a little girl, I used to dream of working in the really tall building with a pointy top by the river. And that having got there on the 45th floor, I realized that my definition of success was wrong. It was based on money, power, and status. And that what we don't talk about in terms of our friends, our family, our society, peers, colleagues, is that actually with that comes depression, broken relationships, stress, anxiety, to name a few. But that sometimes it takes getting to where you want to be to realize it's not where you're meant to be. And that was accompanied by a photo of me on the 45th floor staring out at London, having got to where I wanted to go from such a young age. And that post went viral and had about 80,000 people read it. So I'd posted it at lunch, and by the time I got to my leaving drinks, there was a lot of sort of discussion around, what had actually happened, because on the surface, everything looked fine at work. On the surface, on LinkedIn, everything looked fine. On my Facebook, I, was going on holidays with friends to 5-star hotels and Michelin dinners. And to a lot of my peers, that was what everyone was aspiring to have. And actually, I realized that I don't really care about those things anymore. They don't matter to me. And realizing, I think the massive realization of all of that was that actually my mental health came first, and that nothing, absolutely nothing, is more valuable than that. I think that was the biggest takeaway from that situation.
Wow.
Did it take sort of what length of time, I guess, leaving that role? Was there a period of reflection, self-discovery? How do you go about from leaving? You've come to a realization, this is not for me, my success measures are not what I thought they should be. What kind of process do you then go through to move forward?
So it was really funny because everyone at work was asking me what competitor I was going to work in, because it was a very niche sector of the financial services. So everyone kind of knows everyone, and you kind of end up going to all the same companies or hopping about in the industry. And I was like, no, I don't have any intention of staying in this industry. If there was anything I knew, that was definitely not. And then people were like, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I'm going to take 6 weeks out. I'm going to go and travel to was going to India, Sri Lanka, and Nepal, and everyone's like, "Oh my God, are you gonna like go and do the whole eat, pray, love thing? And you're gonna go and like find yourself?" And I was like, "I've just spent 2 years doing that. I'm just going on a really good holiday that was really needed." And I describe that holiday a lot as unpeeling the crap that I had accumulated over the space of however many years that I was in the financial services, which you start to morph into other people that you work with. You start to morph into another version of yourself to fit into what's expected of you. You start to, be someone that you're not. And for me, whilst I'd found myself, I needed to peel back all of that, scrape all of that rubbish that had kind of accumulated over the years and go, okay, now I'm ready to be me. And one of the main things was, when I leave that office, I am leaving the mask at the door, and I will never ever put that back on, no matter what. Like, that was just a thing. So there was a period of going traveling for 6 weeks, which I was meant to go with a friend, and at the last minute he couldn't go. And so I ended up backpacking on my own, and it was just such an amazing experience, because I realized actually I went from, designer clothes, high heels, handbags, to like literally t-shirts and shorts and a backpack and nothing else, and realizing actually you do not need anything to live a good life. And then thinking, oh shit, if I hadn't have bought those heels, I could be here another week. eBay. So that was kind of that process. And then I came back and thought, what am I going to do next? I'd interviewed in a few companies whilst I was abroad, and when I got back, from people that had either approached me or that I'd actively applied, and I was looking initially sort of learning and development in a different industry. And then I was thinking, okay, maybe the charity sector, because I, had spent a lot of time in my spare time through that period of depression. I'd done a lot of volunteering because it was for me a way to have another purpose. So I did a lot of work with sort of homeless charities and a lot of social mobility work. And so by the time I kind of got back, I was dabbling with a few ideas, and then I was just like, why don't I just do my own thing? And I'd kind of, had the idea when I was working in the city, because I'd done these sort of workshops for young people from social mobility charities, and I thought, if I could do this for a living, I would be a happy woman. And if I could spend my days on LinkedIn, I would also be a happy woman. And so I kind of thought, okay, if those two things are important to me, how do I make a career out of those things? And all of a sudden I had a lot of visibility from that post when I left. So I set out to build a career around the two things that I loved, and from there it just grew.
Marvellous. So talk to us a little bit about what you're doing now.
So I initially started kind of coaching young people, and then realised that I wasn't that interested in just young people. I wanted to target the kind of young people that came from my same socioeconomic background or demographic. So I started working with social mobility charities that place these students with cities, and there's quite a few that do that. I obviously was part of a program of just the one. They ended up becoming my first client, which was nice because obviously there was a lot of history. I'd also hired 2 of their interns from their programs when I was in that training and development role. So that was quite nice. So I started public speaking, and that was very much around my story, because I really wanted to instill that financial sector was not the only option, and to not feel the pressure that you might be feeling because it's what your parents tell you should be doing. And if anything, just try and, if you are going to go down that route, just try and figure out who you are as much as possible, even at that age, as much as you can, to then be able to find a company best suited for you, where your values aligned and whatnot. So I started talking a lot around networking. I started talking a lot about building my personal brand on LinkedIn. I started sort of running some job hunting strategy workshops and LinkedIn workshops. And then off the back of that kind of started, then I got approached by Deloitte and said, would you come in and do some digital content for our intranet for our young apprentices? And then would you come in and deliver some workshops for them on their first day at work, and that was probably one of the greatest contracts that I ever did, because they pretty much were like, we don't want to kind of dictate what you want, we want you to do, like literally blank canvas, what do you want to do, and partnered me up with an agency that basically whatever I said we did. So it was just amazing to have that, you know, opportunity to just be myself, and to instill what for me felt like an important message when you start working in those environments, and be able to influence, you know, that first day at work. So I still continue to do a lot of the kind of graduate development at university stage, then at the graduate fairs, and then when they start to join the corporates, I've also done some work with Shell. So that's sort of the graduate side of things. I then started doing the LinkedIn stuff. So I started off initially working in helping people build their personal brands on LinkedIn, and very quickly started getting inbound leads from very sort of senior level, C-suite level, either leaving their jobs to become consultants and do what they love at a later stage in their life. And people that were either career transitioning or just wanting to share their message or experience and values, or become a speaker. So I've been doing that primarily since I left, and it's been my main sort of business focus. But what that's ended up sort of naturally kind of going into is that when I work with them and they're still within their business, they then go, oh, could you work with my team, my sales team or my marketing team? So now I'm kind of going into, just now 2 years later, I'm going into this territory of working on company brands on LinkedIn, and then also working in employer branding on LinkedIn. So kind of expanding what I do and expanding the business, because I'm no longer working on my own.
Exciting.
So this is literally sort of very recent, very exciting, and I'm calling it the Authentic Collective, of a group of people that are helping either individuals or businesses share their stories on LinkedIn in an authentic way, which kind of makes sense in terms of, you know, I see the graduates, I see the companies, I work with the companies. How can we create messaging that meets the right people, and the right people can, you know that they're in good hands? And then the sort of third thing that I do, I wear a few hats, was being the co-founder of LinkedIn Local, which is the biggest campaign on LinkedIn that started off with myself and 3 other people. A lady in Coffs Harbour, which obviously, Michelle, you know, called Anna McAfee, who had this idea of getting her LinkedIn network offline. And she was someone that sort of followed my content on LinkedIn when I sort of started initially blogging and talking about young people and millennials, and saw what she was doing, and I thought, oh, I'm doing something similar, because what I'd done when I left my job, having no idea what I was going to do, which was sort of that period of that you mentioned, James, of trying to figure out what I wanted to do, was going for coffees with people in my LinkedIn network. I had nothing to sell because I didn't have a business idea yet or what I wanted to do, but just meeting them face to face and going, you know, we chat a lot on LinkedIn, let's just catch up and, you know, let's chat. And off the back of that, you know, a lot of them ended up being my clients when I eventually had a business, because I didn't have anything to sell. I was genuinely interested in the person and building those relationships. And Anna was doing something similar, but in a group setting. So for me, it felt like, oh, okay, we're sort of doing something similar-ish. Why don't we join forces under sort of the same hashtag or brand or whatever you want to call it? And she got contacted by a guy in Brussels and a guy in New York that were also interested. And we got on a Skype and thought, okay, what do we want to do with this? Because Anna hadn't done it yet. So we thought, okay, no selling, no swapping of business cards, people give instead of taking. Like, that was the sort of ethos. And we thought, let's put together a set of values that are important to us, like authenticity, like the encouragement of collaboration, things like respect and inclusivity, because that was what was important to us. And every time I was going to networking events in London, people are shoving business cards down your throat. They're trying to get something. Everyone's scrambling for business. Like, you can smell desperation in the room.
And literally, they look at you and go, "Oh, she won't buy my stuff," and then you just get disregarded. Yeah, it's horrible.
Yeah. So we were like, how do we create spaces where all the opposite happens? Because I couldn't find anywhere that was like that. And so we started these, kind of not knowing what was really going to happen. And, you know, 4 people, 4 countries, 4 cities. and the thing just blew up. Literally, like, it took we had 15 people in each event, each country for the first one, and as these things happen, it always grows from there. It got to about September time, and I had this videographer approach me and said, "Do you mind if I video your events?" And I said, "Well, sure, but it's all not for profit, so I can't pay you." And he was like, "No, I just love what you're doing, and for us it would be good exposure because you've got a big following, so if you're sharing our video." And I thought, yep, that works. And all of a sudden we had video content because people were seeing these events, but they didn't really get what it was. They thought it was networking events. And it was like, no, it's not. It kind of is, but it isn't. It's more kind of a community thing, and it's more around connecting humans and all of that sort of stuff. And they filmed it, and all of a sudden, all of the people involved with it started sharing this video. So we started getting a lot of questions around, how do I set up my own? What is it? And then Manu had a post, I think he was in Singapore, and he was at an event speaking, and he'd set it up. There's about 100 people, and Jeff Weiner got tagged in it. And he then commented on it and was like, doing great things, and then copied, the head of product at LinkedIn, I think. And all of a sudden 1.4 million people saw that post. And again, we just had a massive spurt of people coming to us and going, "What are you doing? Like, how do I get involved? How do I help? How do I run my own?" And we were like, oh God, like our inboxes were bursting. And then we had and then we had another guy come to us, and he was like, "You guys don't have a website, and your hashtag is getting too long, so people are finding it hard to find your events. Can I put a website together?" And I was like, "I'm sorry, but we don't have any money. This is all not for profit. We're doing it in our own time." And he's like, "No, love what you do. Can I just do it?" And we were like, well, yeah, sure. So all of a sudden we had a website, because we were getting a lot of questions of, I work in Sydney, but I travel to Singapore, and then sometimes I'm in Brisbane. Like, how can I know if I'm traveling where these events are? So all of a sudden the website fixed that. We then started, building a pack, because a lot of people were saying, "But I've never run an event, or I've never built a community." And we were like, okay, we need to help people do this, because it's not as easy. Well, we realized none of us were none of us ran events before starting these, and we're starting to see what worked and what didn't work, and so we just wanted to kind of support people, and we'd onboard people, make sure they had the right intentions, and make sure that they had the support they needed, connected them to other people that might be in their area that wanted to do it. We were very much about collaborating, so if there was one person in an area and someone else wanted to do it, we'd bring them together. And a lot of businesses were formed in that way, a lot of friendships, lots of things came off the back of that. And over the course of 2 years now, it's almost been 2 years, we grew it into 90 countries in over 650 cities, which is just insane, with no money, and just people's time and efforts and love for the concept. Just earlier last week, we got a message from LinkedIn saying to us, "Hey guys, we've got some news around our terms and conditions, which we've set up to do with LinkedIn Local. We'd love to get on the phone with you." And we had a look at them, and we just thought, this is not us. We don't have any control on this. It wasn't a conversation that we could there was no space to negotiate. So we just thought, do you know what, I think it's time we step away, because it no longer aligns with our values. It opens it up to anyone and everyone, and that whole idea, people were coming a lot because people couldn't sell. And I think that's going to open up to a lot of creating sales funnels, email marketing, people trying to sell from stage if they're speaking. And it would dilute a lot of the quality communities and events we created. And for us, we didn't want to put our name on that anymore. And I think it was just time to let, and a lot of time and effort went into, onboarding all of these people, and now it was open. So there was no point of having an onboarding system or a host pack, because everything became redundant the minute those terms and conditions were put in place. And so, it was sad, but in a way it was good, because we finally got the recognition that it was important to them to have to do that, and publicly, acknowledge that we exist 2 years later. So we left that, and now the team, because we've worked with each other for 2 years, we thought, there's more to this story. There's more that we can do. And so we set up a company called Local X, which is around how do we help businesses, organizations create communities like we did, and how do we help them scale in the same way we did? Because what we realized is that we learned a hell of a lot in 2 years. We did things wrong, we did things right. So we've decided to kind of go with two things. So one is building the technology to house communities, because we really struggled. LinkedIn wasn't a great place to have our hosts. Groups are terrible.
Awful.
Yeah. Then we had some on Slack, but not everyone liked or was on Slack. And then we had some on LinkedIn group messages, and it just wasn't working out for us. And, we just never really did anything. And so what we realized is that actually there's no we looked at a lot of technologies, but, there wasn't anything that was really helping us do everything we wanted to do. And so last week, the whole team, in weird timing, the whole LinkedIn local team was in London.
Wow.
Just as we announced the news that we were leaving LinkedIn local, and well, now it's the Local X team. And we started designing what our technology would look like, and a prototype is ready, and we're testing this week. Yeah. But another thing, and you get in all the top news, is that we're launching a community marketing conference, which we've realized that actually, whilst sure it would be nice to be compensated in a way for everything that we've done over the last 2 years, the reason why we did it was more important than money, because we spent 2 years pouring hours and hours of our free time into this. And so we wanted to create a community, a conference of community makers, whether that's a community marketer, manager, maker, doesn't matter who you are. Let's bring you together and let's help you continue to grow your communities. Or if you don't have one and you want to grow one, how do we teach you how to do that? And not from just us, but from some of the people that have created some of the best communities around the world. And that's something that really excites me, because it's saying we're building a technology, but this technology might not be for you, but here are all the other people that have these technologies that can help you grow your communities. And these are all the people that, consult on community building. This isn't like, hey, it's a marketing for us, by us sort of thing. This is there is nothing out there that are bringing all these people that are doing amazing things together, and that's more important to us than actual us ourselves.
When is this happening?
May 2020.
We have to put ourselves down for that one.
Can we come? It's exciting. Yeah. So our website will be launching on Monday.
Oh, wow.
So it will all be live.
So exciting.
Yeah.
So if anyone is interested in Local X, employer branding, personal branding, LinkedIn, etc., what's the best way to get in touch with you?
So right now, my website is under construction, because a lot has changed since I started. So the best place, or maybe it will be ready by the time this comes out, but my website's normally www.authenticalex.com. If not on LinkedIn, you can find me as Alexandra Galviz or Authentic Alex. And if you want to find out a bit more about Local X, it's localx.org, and the conference is www.communitymakersconference.com.
Perfect. Well, thank you ever so much. That has been amazing.
Thank
Absolutely
you.
Loved hearing all your story, and can't wait to keep watching your career just go from strength to strength. So thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Alex.
Cheers.
Thanks everyone for listening. Check out all the show notes at inspirationnorth.com. Join us again for the next episode, when we'll be chatting to another inspirational person. If you like this, subscribe and tell your friends. If you didn't like this, subscribe anyway and tell everybody.